Is just, I don't remember seeing John as distraught as he was this night. What has happened, he told me, he left his briefcase in this room of 150 FBI agents and got a phone call. Couldn't hear on his cell phone, so he just walked outside to take his call. Walked back in, his briefcase was gone. He was completely freaked.
O'Neill's bag contained classified documents.
In the briefcase were a few classified emails and a classified document called the Annual Field Office Report, a summary of the New York FBI's Office Counterterrorist and Counterintelligence Operations, including one very sensitive investigation being conducted by another New York counterintelligence FBI special agent, Michael Dick. After the incident, whoever stole O'Neill's briefcase had found out what O'Neill knew about both al-Qaeda and their Israeli shadows. John O'Neill's FBI colleague, Mike Dick, aggressively investigated the Israeli ring before and after 9/11. Like O'Neill, he soon found himself removed from his duties on the orders of the then head of the Justice Department's Criminal Division, Michael Chertoff. Dick was very suspicious when Israeli movers quickly moved Zim American-Israeli Shipping Company out of its 10,000 square foot office on the 17th floor of the North Tower. The partially Israeli state-owned firm fortified a $50,000 security deposit when it terminated its lease and vacated the building 1 week prior to 9/11. Could there have been communications of the coming attacks with the Israeli spy ring? These are questions which the 9/11 Commission never sought answers to. Evidence that other Israelis had been forewarned several hours before the attacks surfaced on an Israeli instant messaging service known as Odago. At least 2 Israeli-based employees of Odago received warnings of an imminent attack in New York City more than 2 hours before the first plane hit the World Trade Center. Odago had its U.S. headquarters 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. The Odago employees, however, did not pass the warning on to the authorities in New York City.
In tonight's report, we learned that the concern about phone security extends to another company founded in Israel that provides the technology that the U.S. government uses for electronic eavesdropping.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Here's how wiretapping works in the U.S. Every time you make a call, it passes through the nation's elaborate network of switchers and routers run by the phone companies. Custom computers and software made by companies like Comverse are tied into that network to intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls, and at the same time transmit them to investigators. The manufacturers have continuing access to the computers so they can service them and keep them free of glitches. But the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Converse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. It is the FBI's office in Quantico, Virginia that has jurisdiction over awarding contracts and buying intercept equipment. And for years they've thrown much of the business to Converse. A handful of former U.S. law enforcement officials involved in awarding Converse government contracts over the years now work for the company. Numerous sources say some of those individuals were asked to leave government service under what knowledgeable sources call troublesome circumstances that remain under administrative review within the Justice Department. And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett?
Carl, is there any reason to suspect in this instance that the Israeli government is involved?
There are growing instincts and an awful lot of law enforcement officials in a variety of agencies who suspect that and have begun compiling evidence and a highly classified investigation into precisely that possibility.
James Bamford, the famous investigative reporter who declassified Operation Northwoods, the top-secret military plan to attack the United States with false flag terror to influence a war with Cuba in the early 1960s, recently released a new book detailing that Israel's booming high-tech industry is a branch of the Mossad.
After 9/11, many Israelis were rounded up in a spy ring that was discovered.
Some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. Investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity.
The art students were also shadowing the very same Arab cells that would later carry out the 9/11 attacks.
Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally.
On March 22nd and 27th in 2002, DEA agents arrested 5 Israelis in the Oak Hills apartment complex in Irving, Texas. A $10,000 bond for Michael Gall was placed by Ophir Bayer, an employee of the Israeli telecommunications firm Amdocs, a firm with operational access to the telephones being used by FBI agents John O'Neill, Michael Dick, and the DEA agents involved in tracking the Saudi mafia drug shipments being used to support various terror cells in the United States and abroad.
We learn about an Israeli-based private communications company for whom a half dozen of those 60 detained suspects worked.
Fox News has learned that some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone. How? By obtaining and analyzing data that's generated every time someone in the U.S. makes a phone call.
One sitting in state, please.
Here's how the system works. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the phone companies by Amdocs Limited, an Israeli-based private telecommunications company. Amdocs has contracts with the 25 biggest phone companies in America and more worldwide. It is virtually impossible to make a call on normal phones without generating an Amdocs record of it. In 1999, the super-secret National Security Agency, headquartered in Northern Maryland, issued what's called a top-secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information report, TSSCI, warning that records of calls in the United States were getting into foreign hands, in Israel in particular. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Special Agent Dick, who worked closely with O'Neill, had discovered a troubling ring of Israeli movers operating in New York and New Jersey, many of whom had past connections to Israeli intelligence and military demolition units.
The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and/or explosive ordnance units.
Dominic Suter was the head of urban moving systems.